high level of environmental stewardship. So the Medway Community Forest Co-op, we aim to support local communities through sustainable and ecosystem-based forest management. And our initiation in 2015, we became Nova Scotia's first community-led Crown area license. So some things that we do are multi-value forest management. We operate with a member-based cooperative, so anyone can join with a small membership fee. We have an elected board with economic, environmental, social, First Nation seats with members at large. And in 2015 launched as a pilot project for alternative means of forest management and planning and use as a working community forest. As a Crown Land licensee, we operate on 15,000 hectares of Crown land, which is in the bright purple color. And this is sort of nestled within a mosaic of Crown lands, protected wilderness areas, parks, and private land, just off Trunk Route 8 there in the Annapolis County. So you can see Ketchikan National Park and the Tobiac Wilderness area there, but MFC makes up this purple area. So some notes from our management plan, just some sort of special management conditions that we have adopted. Our additional precautions for our species at risk. We implement a silent season, which means that we are halting harvest operations for the month of June for the time where nesting for migratory birds is at its highest occurrence. We have larger water buffers for our water courses from 20 meters to 30. There's a limit there for stand area clear cut size set to 15 hectares, as well as utilizing silvicultural prescriptions that really focus on promoting Acadian forest restoration. So diving into the study and some things that took place in the spring. So big picture, why biodiversity matters in the first place. I think it's pretty clear to most of us that the greater species diversity ensures that natural sustainability for all life forms, and that healthy ecosystems can better withstand and recover from various stressors and natural disasters. And plain obvious, it's required to sustain the natural services that we rely on. So since the land base that we're talking about here has a long history of forest management, much of it was predominantly even aged. The goal of creating this baseline biodiversity study is to evaluate the forest health today and to determine what aspects of the ecosystem are doing really well and what aspects are struggling or in poor condition. So the study objectives were to first quantify forest conditions to set that baseline against which future management can be designed and monitored. And then second, to inform forest management and increase habitat suitability to natural conditions and maintain diversity. So to do this, it's a big endeavor to analyze the entire forest health. So with just a summer of data collection to get this baseline set up, I first focused in on 5 forest health indicators. These were chosen to evaluate the impact of harvest history in various stand types. So these 5 indicators, the first, Downwood Debris volume and decay class. The second is the abundance of snags or standing dead wood. The third is looking at the understory vegetation, the composition and floristic quality, as well as we included a bird study, so looking at bird species presence and abundance, as well as mammal composition. And these were selected because they're highly impacted by disturbance and effectively measure changes in forest conditions. So just in addition to measuring all of these sort of indicators within the community forest, I also used some information from a study that's done in Maine. We compare our dead wood resources between their harvested and unharvested sites there. So they have some forest resource inventory data as well as ecological reserve data, where these ecological reserves have no indication of any harvesting in the past. So it ended up serving as a bit of a threshold for natural forest, Acadian forest conditions. So you might be wondering a little bit why we're comparing our study to that in Maine. And it is recognized that there are some varying conditions, particularly regarding soil. We're not quite the same, but having that comparison between some more sort of pristine, untouched sites and this ecological reserve data, and it's classified by dominant tree species, which is what my study looks at. There was an easy comparison there, and so it provided a really valuable sort of threshold of what our forest could be like based on an absence of harvest history. So for each of those 5 forest health indicators, a threshold is determined based on various literature and studies, or in comparison with the ecological reserve data in Maine, or by a presence of species at risk. So you can see each of the thresholds there. It is kind of weird presenting to just a computer, but I'm hoping you're all following along in there. I think I can see you guys now. All right. Ooh, I'm just trying to minimize, yeah. There we go. All right. So big picture in Nova Scotia where the study site takes place, you can see our land base there on the map in the Acadian forest region, which the Acadian forest is a transitional zone between the boreal to the north and the mixed hardwoods to the south. So for the study design, I set 25 permanent sample plots throughout the community forest. And in this chart here on the right, you can see the forest resource inventory data. Because over 90% of our forest is comprised of stands dominated by red spruce, black spruce, white pine, and red maple. We focus in on these 4 stand types, as well as with the past history of fire on the landscape. We do include one site there. So it's in a stand that was previously a partial harvest that was burned in the 7 Mile Fire Lake in 2016. So from June to August 2019, forest data was collected in 25 line transect plots. So 6 plots were placed in each of the 4 dominant tree species, and then divided equally between 2 age classes. So we looked at half stands that were intermediate between the ages of 40 and 70, and then the other half in mature between 71 and 90. Which gets us to 24, and then 1 additional plot in post-burn site. So after many weeks of data collection, early mornings, surveying birds, and shuffling around trail cameras, the results are all going to be compiled into this chart, so we kind of get that forest health assessment at a glance. Makes a little bit more sense of these results. And it's simply just based on whether the minimum threshold was met. So it'll either receive a check if it was above that threshold, or an X if it was not met. So going forward, I'm going to go through each of these indicators here, row by row. So we see our Downwood Debris was first 2. The first is just within the community forest. The second in comparison with Maine. Our snags, or our standing deadwood. We have the MCFC Floristic quality, which is our understory vegetation. And then our bird survey and mammals, where we're looking for the species at risk presence. So diving into Downwood Debris, I'm going to go through these results kind of quick. I don't want to linger on them on box plots too long for anyone. But just sort of touch on what we got and get back to that chart and see how it fills out. But here we're looking at downwoody debris in the community forest. We have along the x-axis our dominant tree species as well as the post-burn site. And it's divided by the intermediate and mature class. So intermediate being in those gray bars, which if you can see my cursor, and then the corresponding mature to the right of it in the white. So looking here, our minimum threshold is set at 40 meters cubed per hectare, which indicates sort of a low end of natural variability based on various studies and throughout the literature. So that red line is our minimum threshold to be natural Acadian conditions, which we would be striving for. So we can see that all of our mature stands, the ones in the white, are above and meeting, and all of our intermediate are below, except for white pine. So we're about halfway there in terms of downwoody debris, but you can see that staggering difference between intermediate and mature age class throughout. So moving forward and comparing our downwoody debris with ecological reserve data in Maine. These box plots are a little bit different here. So to compare with Maine, we did have to group our red spruce and black spruce together. So you'll see them just represented here with spruce. And along the x-axis, you have our study and CFC against managed forests in Maine, FIA. And the ERM is that ecological reserve data of Maine, where there's no evidence of harvest in the past. So that's marking our threshold where we would like to be. And so you can see that spruce falls below in both managed, as well as red maple and white pine. It is important to note that there is a considerable difference between our managed forests and the managed forests in Maine. So falling below the natural threshold, but not terribly far off there with white pine. So these next set of data are looking at snag density, so standing deadwood, in the Medway Community Forest in comparison to ecological reserve data in Maine as well. So similar setup there. And you should be able to see that spruce is falling below again. Red maple is falling below, and white pine in this instance for snag density is above that minimum threshold. So when we fill out our chart, we've got a check mark there for white pine. And moving into floristic quality assessment. So the FQA is a universal standardized assessment tool for evaluating the understory, where it uses C values or CC values sometimes stated, which stands for coefficients of conservatism. This C value is determined by expert botanists. They assign a number to an individual species between 0 and 10, where 0 is assigned to species that are most tolerant to human disturbance. So that's one end of the spectrum, and then 10 for species of highest quality to native habitats, or maybe most sensitive. And so the higher the value, the more sensitive. So looking at relevant studies from the region and around, comparing both managed and unmanaged forest stands, the mean C value was set, the threshold set at 4.5, where all the forest plots within the community forest fall below this threshold. You can see set there in the red line. So when we look at this, we see our intermediate and those gray boxes again, compared to the mature stands in the same forest type. There is that stagger again. So the older the stands, there is an increase in all of them. And you can see that that post-burn site is the lowest. So the literature does suggest that the floristic quality assessment values, they will increase in accordance with successional advance over time, as well as that the time since logging disturbance in mature forests, they have been shown to correlate with higher floristic quality. So that trend is evident here, indicating that the quality is improving in older stands and that recovery is evident and disturbance is impacting our understory. So our fourth and fifth indicators here, looking at bird populations as well as mammals. We did 10-minute point count surveys in our plots where we recorded our herd and olive-sided flycatcher. So just the one individual there in an intermediate age black spruce stand. And I was thankful to have a lot of expert help from birders in the area to make this happen. Not a birder myself, but getting there. Much better after this spring. And looking at our mammal surveys, this was done with baited trail cameras. So we baited and set them for 5 nights in each of our plots, where motion censored photos and videos captured many images of black bears, plenty of white-tailed deer, a single bobcat, as well as a marten. So you can see in this bar chart the species abundance up the y-axis by the dominant tree species, or our burn site, where there was no mammals seen. And you can see that the marten was detected in 2 different stand types, this blue box and red spruce, as well as black spruce. But after closer examination and looking at coat characteristics of that individual, it was determined that it was the same marten, so just one observed within 2 plots. So this is exciting for us. American marten populations dropped in mainland Nova Scotia in the early 1900s in response to habitat loss of old forest conditions and as well influence from overtrapping. But beginning in the 1980s, marten were live trapped in New Brunswick and reintroduced into Kejimkujik National Park. So the species serves as a good indicator of ecosystem health due to their requirements for old forest conditions and connectivity. So we're happy to see a presence of American marten in our forest, but would hope for continued population growth as habitat suitability increases going forward. And I did forget to mention that for our species at risk in our bird surveys, we would be looking for rusty blackbird, Canada warbler, or olive-sided flycatcher. As well, for our mammal surveys, we would be looking for mainland moose, Canada lynx, and American marten. Because, sorry, I'm just sliding that over.
So something just happened when
yes.
David signed in. He was also sharing his screen, so you just have to reshare, I think.
Okay. I can
good.
do that. One moment. Mine's kind of frozen right now.
No worries.
Oh, screen share. Okay. Are you able to see again?
Yeah, you're good.
Awesome.
Perfect.
And you were able to hear me just fine? I didn't cut it?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. And for our mammal study, I will note that because we were using trail cameras, we weren't really able to assess bat populations in our forests. So we exclude that from our species at risk tally, unfortunately. Maybe next time. So all of those 5 forest health indicators based on those minimum thresholds thrown together back into that chart. I will note that when we do our comparison for coarse woody debris with Maine, the age classes were just clumped together. It was all the stand data and not differentiated by age. So where you're seeing those blank spots, it's just because it's accumulated. But overall, not the best picture. We can see that a history of harvesting on the landscape has clearly affected our ecosystems. but it's really important information going forward and knowing where to focus our attention, and really important data for our management plan going forward. But that baseline really is somewhere where we know going forward we can look back and track progress. Alright. So some conclusions from the study. The results do indicate that the time since disturbance, whether that is harvesting or fire, it does correlate with greater coarse woody debris abundance, floristic quality, and species diversity. So as we move away from even age management towards more uneven age, helps to promote stand characteristics of older mature forests, and will have lesser impact on forest health. So since the forest age class has been skewed to be younger than what would naturally occur, the community forest area does currently lack suitable habitat for species at risk. So we're not seeing too much presence there. So recommendations from this study and some sort of takeaways. There we go. We know it's necessary to redistribute that forest age class. So extending the harvest rotation to increase forest maturity, as well as promoting uneven age or multi-age management. And that's underway and has been since the community forest initiated in 2015. But that's utilizing selection or partial harvest to more emulate natural disturbance. So there's more patch cut, or you're being selective. You're walking into the forest stand and tree marking and taking note of what trees we need to keep for habitat and for wildlife preservation, or for seed trees. And then you can be more selective about where we want to open up the canopy and let light in, and really allow for more species diversity and regeneration. Our third recommendation is to increase that coarse woody debris and variability of decay. So the more management we have on the landscape, we sort of end up seeing all of our decay in an early stage, which means the wood that's laying on the ground is still, quite fresh and quite solid, and that structure and substrate differs, where we want to be able to have a really rich group of fungi and insects, and having older decay where when we step on a log, it's pretty much just mush and nutrient cycling already. That we want a good mix of decay class, so not just everything pretty fresh. So that gets changed around with having harvest through. So there's some ways that this can be done, and it's with the retention of mature trees and just letting a tree live out its full life course, and letting standing dead wood die and fall and rot over time is an important aspect of the forest ecosystem. So where we are marking trees for wildlife and seed retention, we could also include retention of mature trees to allow that full cycle. And the fourth is to protect and preserve old growth characteristics. So if there's a particular stand of high conservation value, and maybe that stand is marked where we wouldn't have harvest activity. So it's being really selective and intentive about which areas we're conserving. And finally, as much as we collected as much data as we could this summer, it's important to increase the sample size. So going forward, the study should be doubled and increase plots from 25 to 50 at least, and then to resurvey at regular intervals. So going forward for ongoing monitoring, this survey could be done every 5 years. So just some ways in which the community forest is currently managing for biodiversity. Oops, we're scrolling fast. So looking for those wildlife features, I sort of just touched on it a little bit. I was getting ahead of myself. But in addition, I did mention more birding is getting done this spring. So we now are doing annual migratory breeding bird surveys. So that will be done every year and good for ongoing monitoring and seeing how this restoration is working in areas that need more help. But in addition, flagging for cavity trees. So operationally, as many cavity trees as possible should be retained post-harvest, and at minimum, we have a standard of 8 to 10 per hectare, where live trees with cavities are preferred for nesting, and there's various types of cavities for roost, nest, and escape cavities and feeding, and just a bunch of pictures of cute animals to keep your attention. As well, the importance of mast trees on the landscape, the retention of mast tree to maintain a key food source for many mammals and birds, similar to our cavity trees. So a good retention target as well, 8 to 10 trees per hectare, where our hard mast is from beech and oak, and soft mast trees would include birch, ironwood, cherry, mountain ash, as well as some of those understory shrub species like blueberry, serviceberry, and raspberry. And I just sort of wanted to touch on some climate adaptive silviculture and some sort of future projects and some thoughts going forward. So we know that there really is a case for diversity where stand heterogeneity is key to promoting adaptability as well as resilience. So some features and metrics there, a diversity of age, a diversity of species, the structural and vertical diversity sort of pertaining to various heights, as well as healthy shrub and herbaceous layer. So seeing different structures throughout the forest, and less uniform, moving away from uniform as much as we can. And the maintenance of diversity is an insurance plan to limit future changes in social or environmental conditions. Oops. So looking at some other research in the area as well regarding climate change, we know that climate change is a risk to forests globally, where the increase in temperatures and climatic extremes will increase the frequency of natural disturbances. The rising temperatures decrease mortality in non-native species, fluctuations and occurrences of invasives and pests. In particular to our region, of course, the Acadian forest is comprised of species at its northern and southern extent of their natural ranges. So this poses some extra challenges for us, where we do have some of those boreal species where with warming, we're going to be seeing those have more stress and maybe moving farther north out of the province. Maybe 100, 200 years yet, we're thinking really long term with forestry and climate change. And working to do trial research now and planning ahead, there's some things that we can do and some things that are being tested elsewhere. The things including like assisted migration, and maybe not complete with new species that aren't here right now, but genotype moving. So if we have red maples from a southern range that are a little bit differently by genotype and brought up into this area, they could withstand the temperature differences and climatic changes going forward. So at the community forest, yeah, it's planning for how these tree species will respond to climate change in the region, and as well, yeah, getting some new trials and research going forward for climate activity to consider these long terms. So I guess wrapping up, I don't know what time we're at here, but some takeaways really, that this baseline sets a benchmark of current forest health. As we move forward, our management plan is really focusing on restoring Acadian forest conditions and promoting habitat suitability with considerations for climate adaptivity. So I've just dropped my email there, and then a link to our website. Of course, being membership-based in community forest, if you want to join, you're more than welcome to send an email. And then I've also added the link there for my study if you wanted to look into it farther. If you have any questions, I'm happy to chat about it. But I think that's all I've got on my end there, Emma.
Perfect. Great. Okay, thank you so much from all of us, first of all. That was fantastic. You've done so much work, and for me, that was my first time hearing about it, so it went really great.
Wonderful.
And yeah, so no one put anything in the chat while we were talking, but I just wanted to open up. Oh, we got one from Jane. So question from Jane. What are the recommended levels and diameters of CWD, or what will you use as a guide to leave behind for AF restoration?
Yeah, it was quite interesting doing the coarse woody debris stuff. So there is particular interest in large coarse woody debris, which is set at 40 centimeters dBH. So I didn't include it in today's slides, but there was a differentiation within my study where we looked at different size classes in the community forest and the different decay classes, and then did the comparison with Maine as well. So from that data, there was evidence that the community forest was really low in large diameter downwoody debris and coarse woody debris, which is concerning. So, sorry, I'm not sure. I don't remember what the question was.
It's okay. It was just what are the recommended levels and diameters of CWD. I would also say if anyone wants to take themselves off mute and join the conversation, please feel free to do so. At this point, let's join in. Yeah.
More of a chat, of course. I would have to look into the particulars regarding recommendations for like a distribution of size. But what is standing out to me right now is that like diversity and an even sort of spread, where right now so much of the downwood debris that we're seeing is in a young class. So our age class, or the decay class, it goes between 1 and 5. And the majority of what we were measuring was between 1 and 3. So we're really missing late decay class. The 4 and 5 was fairly absent, as well as those larger pieces where there were in particular, I think in our white pine, we didn't have anything greater than 30 centimeters. So it is just so skewed to be low decay as well as smaller sizes.
Okay. Are you able to see the questions in the chat, Jennika, or I can read them out to you if you'd like. There's one from Nick is next.
I think I can see it. Hold on. Chat. From Nick.
Yeah.
Seeing a projected decline in percent of spruce.
That's more just a general question. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me, but you know, I've seen those types of projections before, and one of the times I was standing next to one of my friends who has a woodlot, and you know, he wants to be able to, you know, he cares about his spruce, I guess, and he asked me the question, is there anything he can do to try to increase the resilience of his spruce stands, like when we see those projections? And I was not in a position to answer that question, so.
Yeah, of course, that's a good question, and it's definitely one a lot of Nova Scotians are facing, where we do have such a strong presence of spruce on our landscape. There is different trials and thoughts that moving genotypes from the south up is a really good way of having some of the same species be more resilient and adapted to the different climatic changes. But really, I think it comes down to diversity as well, where we might need to be planting some new species and bringing up some other, might be including ironwood and different things, more ash, and really diversifying our landscape so that it does have more resiliency. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend just strictly planting red spruce.
One of the things that me and my friend talk about for a bit is the woody debris, and you know, that it's not actually necessary to continuously clean it and keep a very perfectly manicured, beautiful looking kind of forest.
Yeah.
I was wondering, is there would there increasing that woody debris, would that potentially have a little bit of a dampering effect on on what's going to happen to those spruce stands, or not necessarily?
So increasing woody debris on the ground layer, are you asking if it would have maybe negative impacts?
Or a positive impact on like the resilience of that stand? Like,
yeah, I'm not sure specifically for spruce resiliency that the downwood, I'm not sure about a direct correlation there. But in terms of ecosystem resiliency and maintaining a good diversity, we need nutrient cycling as well. Like downwoody debris is really important in water retention and soil stability. So in all of these sort of ecosystem services, I'm having a good mix of downwood and yeah, it's important sort of across the landscape.
oh, thanks, great talk.
Thank you. So, wondering what the disposition of species is in undisturbed community. Right. So Carol's asking in areas of undisturbed Acadian forest, maybe what species we would see that aren't currently represented in our landscape, I'm thinking. I did have a chart up that sort of where I said that 90% of our forest is those 4 tree species. And we see that there's such a low percentage of like things like balsam fir on our landscape, where we know the Medway community forest in particular would maybe more naturally have a greater occurrence of hemlock as well as balsam fir, red oak and red maple. So not so much, I mean, we do have our species at risk and ash suffering, but just the distribution and percents of what species are taking up the majority of our stands. So sort of a skewing, we're losing some species in representation and amount.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We had Chad's question.
So, find any plant species at risk? We did not, unfortunately. So in each of our plots, for doing those vegetation surveys, we threw down 1 meter quadrats, 3 of them in each plot. And there was a lot of repetition sort of between these. We didn't get a huge diversity across the different forest stand types, with the exception of the post-burn site was totally different in terms of what species were present, which is kind of interesting. You would think that's how it would go, but yeah, and seeing that floristic quality analysis and seeing how much lower the post-burn falls between there, it was interesting to see that represented in the FQA, but no, we didn't have anything. So I set that minimum standard for the FQA at 4.5, and we sort of fell mostly between 2 and 3, where if we were seeing rare species, there would be the higher numbers, 7, 8, 9, and 10, which we didn't have anything higher than a 6. Community forests elsewhere in the province. Great question. They should be everywhere. Yeah, I think that there are some new developing community forests. Maybe someone else might have some more details or shed some light on that, but I believe it's the Mammal Forest Initiative is of a similar community environment that is managing some lands in the province, and I'm not sure if there is any others right now, but absolutely, I think an exciting way to move forward with forestry. There's so many. I'm wondering why we're so conservative about importing new tree species of oak. Yeah, Dave, great question. It would be, yeah, and I think in terms of bringing up other species and moving things out of their natural range is always, there's always hesitations there, but it's definitely a great area for research and trials. And yeah, I think that there are some projects going on in different parts of Canada, particularly in bringing some of these species up, but definitely something that we're looking into and talking about at the community forest and getting some research trials going forward. Eastern wood debris. So, Cindy. Definitely, yes. Our bird surveying is growing and evolving. So when I did the survey last summer as well, we got started a little bit late. And so what's represented here in this study was definitely a starting point and just a small snapshot where we ended up only surveying in 12 of the 25 plots as well. So this year, the study was more inclusive and we got to all 25 plots and twice, and just analyzing through that data now. So I think going forward, our bird surveys will definitely develop farther. And we did have many more olive-sided flycatchers spotted this year, as well as eastern wood pewee. So a little bit more representative this year in our study, and hopefully going forward to capture more of what's on the land base.
So my question also included, you should probably consider adding in for reporting purposes the other species of conservation concern to get a wider picture of the biodiversity that your forestry practices are helping.
Mm-hmm. And that's pertaining to nighthawk.
Well, no, nighthawk is a species at risk, and I know they are out there because I have heard them when I was on your lands recently. But they're not easily picked up in point counts.
Right.
But if you put out those automated recording units, you can pick them up quite easily.
Right.
And then the other species, I can help you with a list for those if you like. But
yeah, great.
There are other species of conservation concern that are not legally listed, but they're declining for various reasons. So I think it would be worth including those species as well.
Of course, yeah, expanding that. And I think I talked to Donnie this year about like just the accessibility of technology these days and having these automated recorders where you can in the forest and catch so much more. So it would be great to get some of those added in our sites and in areas of interest for sure. And remeasuring downwood debris since the hurricane. Oh man, I imagine things have changed. And yeah, going out into do field work these days is a bit more of a workout. We haven't gone back in and done downwood debris since. So if we go by plans, it would be going every 5 years. So getting back in there in 4 years from now, measuring. So going back in, the decay scale is, we can expect that some of the stuff that came down from the hurricane would still fall in that early decay class when we go back and measure.
But what I was thinking is, since you measured it only last year, just before the hurricane, it will be a really nice opportunity to go back this summer and measure it again. So you have a very clear signal of what the hurricane did.
Yeah, that's true.
If you wait 5 years, you're going to lose much of that signal.
That's a good point. Yeah, of course. And yeah, it's true. We measured like up until August, so just before the hurricane. So going back in, it's a good point. And I have time to do it. So good to get back out in the field some more.
I don't know if there was a question from Tom Herman there. Have you considered adding invertebrate abundance / diversity sampling to your monitoring regime?
Invertebrates, yes, absolutely. It's sort of just a matter of getting as much done as you can with your resources and time. And I'm personally not an invertebrate specialist, but growing the biodiversity monitoring to include as much as we can, in particular to salmon or salamanders as well, where KEDGI has some salamander monitoring. It would be interesting to sort of compare some of our populations in comparison to the park. So continuing to grow the study where this is only going to get bigger going forward, we hope.
The rest of the questions, I believe, are from Cindy. Have we addressed all of them?
Floristic quality.
There was one more I had.
Yeah.
So when you showed your comparative data for your site and the main study for downwoody debris and snag density, the mature sites weren't that different, right? But they were really low for the floristic quality index. So I was just wondering if that had something to do with the particular stand types you were dealing with, or whether Nova Scotia might just happen to be a bit impoverished compared to Maine in terms of those species.
Yeah, so the study, the main study, they didn't actually have understory veg analysis. So looking at our floristic quality, that was just looking at the Medway community forest. So I looked at studies as much as I could to find some local. I think I ended up looking at a little bit from Ontario to try and get a threshold of what the natural floristic quality assessment was, but there was some in New Brunswick. But I looked at maybe about 10 different studies, and that natural sort of threshold between both managed and unmanaged stands. Like there was even floristic quality in farms and roadsides and a variety of sites. And it was all above 5, like 4.5 was sort of a really low threshold, where the other stands I was seeing were more 4.8 to 5.5, even in some fairly disturbed areas. So yeah, I didn't actually get floristic quality from Maine, just the coarse woody debris and snag density stuff from there. But I found it quite interesting in the Maine, because they have data from both their managed forests that are quite comparable to what we're working with, and seeing that some of our managed stands and their managed are quite similar, and then seeing their ecological reserve data, that comparative.
Yeah, that was neat. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for all your questions.
Okay, so it looks like we've lost a couple of people, but most people are still here. Was there anybody else who wanted to just pop in and pose any questions to Jennika before we wrap it up? Any last words? Everybody's cool. So awkward ending these Zoom things. There's no it's like, you know, usually there's coffee and popcorn but no. Okay, then thank you so much, and we'll see you next Thursday.
Thanks for joining in, guys.